Great. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Rihanna Putnam, and I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for the Citizen Science Association. I have a few slides about CSA and a few housekeeping notes about Zoom, and then I'll turn it over to Colleen and Bucky to lead today's discussion. The CSA is a member-driven organization that connects people from a wide range of experiences around a shared purpose of advancing knowledge through research and monitoring done by, for, and with members of the public. Our efforts are concentrated into a biennial conference. Our next one is in May of 2021. We have a peer-reviewed journal and member services such as our working groups, online networking, and webinars like these. Our membership represents the multidisciplinary, multidimensional nature of the field. It includes project leaders, researchers, educators, and more. We have more information about that on our website. We have 9 working groups at CSA that explore cross-cutting issues like ethics, environmental justice, policy, education, and more. Our working groups are one of the key ways that we work to advance the goals of the CSA through the sharing of resources, best practices, and relevant information, both among group members and also to the broader citizen science community. We're looking to revive our education working group soon and hope that many of you might find connections and inspiration there. We have several more events coming up this month and next, including 3 more of these virtual happy hours. So if you haven't signed up for those, or if you see another one that is interesting to you, you can find more information and registration links for those on our website. We also have a webinar at the end of the month on citizen science, community engagement, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This webinar, we are recording it, and we'll share a recording with everyone on today, and we'll likely make it available on our YouTube channel. We have an archive of past webinars on a variety of topics available on a YouTube channel. You can also find that at the webinar page on our website. There are a few ways that you can help support free webinars like these from CSA. One is by becoming a member. You can find out more information about membership on our website. Becoming a member is one of the key ways that you can help create connections across this field and support the work that we do. We also have a donation page that I'll link to in the chat. If you felt inspired by this and have the means, we would really appreciate your support. And like I mentioned, we do have this up in meeting mode. And so if you want to take a moment just to double check that you're muted and that your video is off, we will have an opportunity to get to know one another in the chat. And so if you want to head there now and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from, and if you're affiliated with a project or institution, you can do that there. We will be trying to direct questions to the Google Doc that we shared via email yesterday. And our presenters will share a little bit more about that in just a few moments. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Colleen Hitchcock, who's an Assistant Professor of Ecology at Brandeis University, and Bucky Gates, who is in the Biosciences Department at the North Carolina State University.
While we're getting set up, hi everyone. I am Bucky Gates. You see my name up there as Terry Gates. Either one is perfectly fine.
I'm Colleen Hitchcock. Sorry, I thought you were going to say more than that, Bucky.
Oh, no, no. I'm going to say plenty today.
I'm Colleen Hitchcock. I'm from Brandeis University. I'm also a member of the Professional Development Working Group for CSA and on the UCITSI RCN that Bucky is heading up. And so we're happy to kind of share with you today our take on citizen science in an online format, and we'll hopefully get through some definitions of that as well. In the chat right now, actually, maybe Bucky, you can do it because I don't see an easy way to do it while screen sharing. We're just going to drop in a link to the Google Doc that Rihanna also had sent out to you. And our goal with the Google document is that given there are so many people who are in this webinar, we thought it might be an easier way to kind of track questions, to also keep questions alive after the happy hour, to hopefully crowdsource some answers in the true spirit of open education and, say, crowdsourcing of some of these topics. And so if questions arise, you can still feel free to put them into the chat, but you can also add them to, or our preference is that you add them to the Google document so that we can kind of curate them and work through them that way.
Yeah, so in the chat right now is the link that Rihanna just popped up.
Okay, so just to start with a definition, we're going to use the definition that we used in our webinar on Monday in terms of defining what citizen science is. And those are projects that involve non-scientists in the processes, methods, and standards of research with the intended goal of advancing scientific knowledge or community action. And that's from the National Academies of Sciences. Bucky's going to give you our objectives, and then we're going to ask you 2 quick questions.
Yeah. All right. So we have like 3 like really simple things that we want to do. And first is just defining what online environments are, because there's lots of different ways to look at that. And second, there's lots of things to consider whenever you do citizen science projects. And so we want to outline some of the things that are great about it, some of the things that you need to consider. And you can also think of these as challenges, but not really challenges so much as considerations. And then finally, we're going to take those things and then give you tips and resources about what we have found that makes things very easy to do and how to implement things well. Okay, next.
Awesome. And so, Rihanna, do you want to put up our 2 quick questions just so we can see who has joined us today? So if you can just give us some indication. Yeah, you know the drill. I don't know why I'm explaining it.
Yeah, so at this point, Rihanna's done tons of these and she's an expert at the polling.
Thanks. Yeah, we're just asking, because this doesn't show up on the recording, the primary discipline that folks have. I'm going to give people just a couple more seconds. Looks like most of you have answered.
Okay, so it looks
Great.
like most 75% of the people on the call are from the life sciences, physical sciences being next, other being the mystery to us all, and then kind of a smattering across the remaining disciplines there. Awesome. We have one more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, there definitely seems to be a bias in a lot of citizen science projects towards the life sciences. Yeah, so I'm a paleontologist, and a lot of times you have paleontology being slotted into the physical sciences or geosciences because it kind of covers both geology and life sciences, so biology. I saw that we have a paleobotanist joining us today. That's cool. All right, so what is you guys' level of expertise with citizen science?
Okay, so it looks like about a third have sometimes used it in a class, 10% often use it in a class, and then the other 50% have never used it in a class. Okay, so that gives us some idea. So we're hoping to draw upon those of you who have used it often in the class to help Bucky and I kind of share some insights. The use sometimes, I'm sure that there's going to be a diversity of ideas and projects, so that will also come into play as well.
Yeah.
And for the rest, we'll get you up to speed. Go ahead, Bucky.
And then as we go through this, and those of you that have used it quite a bit, I think 11% of you, I want you to, if you don't mind, to go to the doc, and if people write questions that you might have good insight for, write your suggestions down. I think you can see, so in the beginning, I've taken some of the initial questions, put in suggestion boxes. So if we could just do that for the rest of the questions that are posted, and then utilize the expertise of everyone on here, I think getting a larger consensus is going to work out best for everybody. Okay, so what is citizen science in online environments? Well, I think the best way to start is to break these up into 2 sections. We have the tools that are available for doing citizen science online. Then there are the settings, like the online settings themselves. And so most of us, I think, are considering online teaching for the fall, as well as what we just had to finish up for the spring. And so, of course, online teaching courses, higher ed courses, the first things that come to mind when we think about online environments. But something else to consider is also your digital learning systems, because these are posted online. I'm talking like Blackboard, I'm talking Moodle. Those are places that we want to put maybe our PowerPoints, or put our lectures. Perhaps we want to put our assignments going to be up there, quizzes, tests, potentially, all those things might be on that system itself. And then there's online only projects. And what I mean by this are citizen science projects that are only based in online environments. There are things, a lot of projects in microbiology. So projects that deal with sequencing genomes or folding proteins, for instance, those are some of the more famous ones. And you really can't do that hands-on without a laboratory. So what these projects have done is utilized online environments to simulate some stuff to help you help them in the citizen science context. So that's why I consider that to be a setting for online environments. Now the tools are places like SciStarter or Zooniverse, which Colleen's going to talk about later. So a place to help get projects. You also have projects that have their data collection online. That's a tool, but it's also an online environment. And then you also have access to digital tools. And these are anything that is available online that you can then use. So take, for instance, an analytical tool like ImageJ. You can make measurements from pictures in ImageJ. That's a tool that you can then use within a citizen science context. I think most of what we're going to be referring to, we're going to be talking about online courses because that's what most of us are concerned about today. But as we go through, we will be bringing up these other aspects as well.
Helps if I unmute. So there's definitely a variety of ways to include citizen science in your courses. And one of the things that I often consider when I'm, thinking about including a project or a citizen science assignment in my courses is, thinking about what it is that I want the students to accomplish by engaging in that research. And sometimes my approach is that maybe the thing I want them to learn by engaging in the citizen science project doesn't necessarily relate directly to what the project might be attempting to do research on, but I can have my students learn about a topic while engaging in the citizen science project, and they can produce data as a byproduct of, say, the assignment or the project that I want them to engage in. So I think one of the first things in kind of thinking about that umbrella of, where does this fit and how does it fit is to think about, are you thinking about citizen science as a semester-long companion? Are you thinking about it as a course-based project? Are you thinking about individual projects maybe as standalone assignments that students are going to be engaging in? All right, I'm going to pass back to Bucky.
Okay, I'm going to come back. Sorry, I was typing on the doc. Okay, so what I just started on the doc is, and someone else can fix this up. We can take a real community effort on getting this doc up and running. So it was a place for the big takeaways, the ahas. That we have a place for questions. Then it occurred to me, well, maybe as we go through and we talk about some stuff and people start to ask questions, you're going to be like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think Colleen hit on a really, really important point that will be brought up later. So if anything just occurs to you, you can go to that one section and write it down. Okay, so in terms of opportunities for citizen science, especially in online environments, I think that it's really great because citizen science allows us to do microscopic and macroscopic research. Citizen science really is a tool. It's not a discipline, a scientific discipline per se. It's a way to obtain the data, analyze the data, and get out new discovery of knowledge. So like I mentioned before, there are projects that do only things in the microscopic realm. And then most of you are probably considering projects that do more macroscopic stuff. You can see on the right here, we have a picture of the mimicry experiment where people will go out and they will find insects, take pictures of them. And that's definitely a macroscopic thing. And then we also have support research as a byproduct of learning. Again, something else that Colleen just brought up because it is so inherent in what citizen science is. As students go through and they do their projects, they do their assignments, at the same time that they're doing that, they're also making that contribution. And that's the really great thing. Even though if you take the piece of paper or whatever that they present their results on to you and you ball it up and throw it away, then it's fine. But that assignment is not throwaway in the end because they made that initial contribution to the data. And to me, that's what my students have found to be super great, because they are actually contributing to a community, contributing to global knowledge. And that like adds a whole new aspect to learning. And then another great opportunity is that you can access, explore, and you can analyze data. Many of the tools that are included on online citizen science projects include visualization. And one particular example I'm familiar with is Caterpillar's Count. This is a project in which students or volunteers will look for insects and other arthropods on leaves of trees. And the whole purpose is to look at food for bird migration. Right, that's the ultimate goal of the overall project, but it involves individual insects on trees. And so the visualization tools there are absolutely fabulous. So these online projects allow you to do all sorts of great stuff to look at your data in reflection of everyone else's data. Okay, go ahead, Colleen.
Awesome. So I just want to say one more or two more things maybe about the photos on this slide. And just kind of some of the ways that I have used citizen science in my courses, both in remote or fully online courses, as well as face-to-face courses, in terms of the depth of the kinds of assignments and the kinds of things you can do and the types of commitments you might be making to a project. So for example, the mimicry experiment is a project that I use when I teach a course on animal behavior. And this is a project that's run out of the University of Leeds. And what you do on the project is you don't create an account, you don't have to log in. There's no kind of record of you as an individual in the project. And you essentially go online and you rate the similarity of these two insects that are shown on the scale of 1 to 10. And you get no, that's the extent of the directions that you get. And so what I usually do is have students do this on their own for a little while as a homework assignment, and then we come into class and we do it together. And I use it as a way to get students really thinking about what is a search image when we start to talk about animal behavior, or what is mimicry and how close does the match actually have to be? And they have all sorts of questions, because having done this project, they have concerns about, how varied their own individual responses are. And so it gives them that lens to then think about a search image in the context of our class. And then many of you, I have lots of experience using iNaturalist, and I saw there were some fellow iNatters signed up for this. So if you are thinking about using iNaturalist and want to make more of a commitment to a project and have that as a companion, iNaturalist is a great citizen science project to have as a companion to your course as well. Okay. So the key to success in using or engaging students in citizen science is to identify a project that aligns with your course learning objectives and complements your course content, right? So we want to make sure that we're not, sticking that square peg into a round hole, that you don't pick the project that requires a 3-month commitment if you don't have time to use that or to include that in your class. And then also to think about why citizen science, say, versus a demonstration lab or versus some other kind of activity. I obviously am an advocate for, not having all of the students' efforts to go somewhere beyond the university or beyond our course. And so for me, that's one motivation as for why citizen science, but I think that's something to consider. And, if you can't make the commitment to the project in some way, shape, or form, that just kind of keeping that idea in mind, right, that as you're thinking about it. You want to make sure that the project that you pick, or multiple projects, that you're actually supporting the goals of the citizen science research, right? So that because you're going to be bringing students in, and one of the things to remember about bringing students into citizen science projects is that their motivations are going to be different than other citizen scientists who might be involved in that project. So you want to make sure that by bringing them in, that you are still supporting the citizen science project goals. The other key to success is participating in the project before you bring students in. And I also recommend participating in the project alongside your students. And the reason that both of those pieces are kind of key is that doing it before you bring students in lets you fully understand the experience. You're going to know what students are sharing. You're going to see what they experience by doing that research. And then by continuing to be in the project alongside them, even if it's out of your discipline or your exact expertise, it's okay, because then they'll see that it's okay to take risks, and it's okay to maybe get something wrong sometimes when they're doing something in a citizen science project, as long as they're following the general protocols that the project outlines. You want to always encourage attention to data quality, but you don't want students to become petrified, right, that their data isn't perfect. And so one of the things that I recommend is that you scaffold engagement in whatever citizen science project that you choose to have your students engage in. So for example, I mentioned I use iNaturalist. One of the things that I do with students in iNaturalist is that the first time that they engage in iNaturalist, they only make a really small number of observations, and then I go in and I actually check all of those observations so that I can see that they understand how the platform works before I say ask them to do more within that platform. And so they get a lot of feedback early as to how they've engaged, so that when they engage at a more significant level, that I have confidence in their skills and they're not worried about what's going to happen. So those are some of the keys to success. And I would recommend that kind of scaffolding, that kind of dipping your toe into a project, giving lots of feedback on that, and then kind of letting them fully loose in a project as a good way to get a sense of what your students are going to be doing. So the things to consider, right, those are our keys to success, but some of the things to consider are when we're bringing students into a project, right? What I often say is that I really hope that students will engage in this project because I've, introduced it to them in this way that it aligns with their learning, so that there's a carrot to, right, entice them in to kind of do their best, put their best self forward, especially if the project is fully open. And by open, I mean when students submit their data, that data is instantly visible to everybody else, right? So you want to just make sure that you're creating appropriate incentives for them to be motivated to be in that project. So you want to be aware of how any grading, whatever grading structure you put on top of that engagement, how that may create a perverse incentive within the project. So that's just something to kind of think about. And so one of the ways to do this, particularly in an online class, maybe where students aren't all together in the same place, is forming, peer groups. And with those peer groups, there's opportunity for peer verification. There might be opportunity in some cases for peer data replication, and then also for some peer feedback, right? Because when you're managing students in these projects, especially if it's a fully open project, it can become quite cumbersome, especially if you have a large course, to do all of that kind of, I'm going to say policing, but policing. But if you can kind of create some of those peer networks so that they're replicating feedback, verifying one another, that will also kind of help some appropriate, create appropriate conditions. The other thing you want to think about when you have them engage in a citizen science project is how you'll verify student activities and what you'll need to verify that. So I gave the example earlier of the mimicry experiment. And in that case, when I assigned that as a kind of pre-class assignment, the only verification I had of that was their familiarity, that when we did it together in class, as to kind of how fluent they were kind of working through it. And I could tell. So there were no points, or there might have been minimal points kind of in the pre-class engagement attached to that, right? So setting those, thinking about how you're going to verify and when you need to verify what students are doing. And then the other thing to consider is to remember what you're asking of students. So if you're asking students to create accounts outside of your university, what are the privacy concerns around that? What are your university policies for putting students outside of the kind of university framework? And so kind of investigating some of those concerns as well, considering, open versus closed projects. And then another concern that I would put out there is just remembering to also consider project accessibility, and whether there is a way for students with all types of backgrounds and perhaps all types of issues to fully be included in the engagement in those projects. Bucky, before I flip, is there anything you wanted to say on either of those two? I realized I didn't pause between the last one.
No, it's okay. Okay, so one of my last things I really wanted to talk about was the trust and the data quality aspect of this. And I hate memes. Okay, that's just one of my things. I can't stand memes. But this one, I felt like I had to put on. And it's because it illustrates everything, I think, perfectly. Okay, so in this particular picture, you had this great clip. It went on the place it was supposed to go on, but it snagged the clothes, right? It is almost perfect. It's almost perfect. And everything will probably be fine. You know, this person falls off is probably fine. But what if it's not? All right, that's always in the back of your mind. What if it's not fine? And as you go through this data collection with your students, I'm sure it's going to be in the back of your mind. What if it's not fine? All right, what if this data is not fine? Well, we need to think about this from two realms. One is the realm of the professor, you guys. One is the realm of the citizen science administrator, so the person who's in charge of the project. So projects they should have stuff in place to help with pull out the bad data. You know, that person that goes in just to cause trouble, that's putting in, you know, all incorrect values for everything. It should be there. But on your side, you need to have two things. One is you have to have some kind of way to test for data quality. That can be either stuff that Colleen just talked about, like an iNaturalist taking a few pictures, or maybe you have things such as like inserting into a Google Doc or a Google spreadsheet. You look at the data, and if it's cool, if you like it, then you can have your students submit to the real project. Or you can have the data quality be the trust that you have in students. And so every single time I have them do a citizen science project, I teach, by the way, I teach huge classes. I teach 200 students usually. And I have them go outside and take citizen science data, and I don't monitor them because I can't. I can see probably 30 students in the time they're out there. And so I talk to them about integrity. And I tell them that this is just like taking a test. It is no different, except the difference is on a test, if they cheat, they're hurting themselves. If they cheat on this data, they're hurting all of humanity. And it's a very big thing, right? It's a big deal. And a lot of them take it super seriously, which is great. And I think it's because students want to go out and have that control. They want to be put into a responsible place, be treated like an adult. And so if you treat your students like adults, ask them to act like adults, I think a lot of that trust will be developed. And then we're not going to really talk about it today, but I want you to just kind of keep it in the back of your mind, mull over this as you start to work on citizen science projects for yourself. And what's the difference between citizen science data collection, where a project asks volunteers such as me, such as my students, to go out and collect data on arthropods on leaves? What's the difference there versus a lab going out and doing the same thing? It's both about trust. When I read the paper on insect phenology from different regions that were collected by a research lab, I am trusting that they collected that data correctly. And citizen science is also about that. It's a little more hippy-dippy than the scientific data collection, but that's what it ends up being. You know, there's not a lot of difference. And so I want you to think about bridging the gap between what is rigorous from a lab taking scientific data, and kind of the ramifications of bad data from a specific lab, and the citizen science data coming from your classroom. Just how would you bridge that? All right, that's your challenge. Okay, next, Colleen.
Okay, so we've given some insights into how we think about citizen science, but now how do you find a project? And so I saw Caroline Nickerson on this call, so I think she has joined us as one of the attendees, and this is one of her slides from our webinar last Monday, kind of outlining the opportunities to connect with citizen science projects via SciStarter. And so SciStarter is a great place to start and to look to identify and find a project that is right for your class. It's a great place to, kind of do those basic searches that'll get you out of the kind of Google environment to perhaps a more targeted search, figuring out what project might align with what particular task you want to accomplish by engaging students in citizen science. The other thing that SciStutter offers is a dashboard that actually allows you, if students create their accounts through SciStutter, there's a dashboard that allows you to actually kind of track and manage students within that. Within the dashboard to kind of keep track of what they're doing. And there's lots of additional kind of resources that go along with both the projects and with engagement that you can draw upon by accessing SciStutter. I will say we've had great success using SciStutter at Brandeis with our undergraduate students. I teach a course that's actually on citizen science, and we've had a great partnership with SciStutter, not just in being kind of able to track our students and see what they're doing, but also having students think about the science of citizen science and writing blog posts about some of their experience and so on. So it's definitely a great place to start. In addition to SciStutter, I would also recommend a couple other places to poke around looking for citizen science projects. Many of these are also indexed within SciStutter, but sometimes it's nicer to see kind of lists and aggregations of projects in smaller arrangements. And so the other places that I highly recommend are looking at Anecdata, which is a portal that hosts citizen science projects, and some of those are open to the public, some of them are not. Citsci.org is another place where it also has this kind of marriage between some being publicly accessible projects and others maybe not. And then Zooniverse for being kind of that suite of fully online citizen science projects that you can have students engage in. And there's several Zooniverse projects that actually pull data from other citizen science projects. And so one example I'll give of that is in my ecology course this past fall. Students were making iNaturalist observations. And the first thing that when students learn how to use iNaturalist that they go out and make observations of here in Boston is squirrels. It's squirrels, robins, and eastern white pines. Those are the big three on campus that students really gravitate toward. And so on Zooniverse, there's a project that then takes squirrel photos from iNaturalist and you curate them and add metadata. And so it was and you're looking at the evolution of coat color. And so it was a great way for students to kind of see this secondary application of these observations that they were making. And then the final thing I would say in terms of finding a project, which especially in this current climate of where we might be going remote, but we still want to build community with our students and we want to create experiences that kind of ground them to our universities, is to think about partnering with local organizations and find out what type of citizen science research they might be engaged in and how maybe your students could flow into that process. And so one example that I've done up here in Boston again is with the Mystic River Watershed Association. It's one of our local watersheds, and they have a herring count where they count the fish returning into the waterway each spring. We're actually in migration right now. They also have a virtual herring count where a few years ago they installed underwater cameras, and so you can go and you can watch video clips and you can count herring. And we've had students engaging in that project, both as students in animal behavior and both as students in ecology, and then in a non-majors fully online course called Biodiversity Connections, where they do the virtual herring count and it connects them, right, to this local watershed that Brandeis is a part of. And so we learn about our local environment through this virtual engagement in that project. And so I would say to look around to some of those local organizations because you never know what kind of innovative things they might be doing. All right.
So just like to wrap this up before we get to our open discussion, and just say there are 3 more happy hours coming up next week. I will be co-hosting with Nicole about how to select a project in citizen science. So I urge you all to please come and talk to us more then. We'll be talking about SiteStarter, Zooniverse, and then ways in which you pick a project based on what you want to teach in the class. And then after that, we have 2 others, assessing student participation. This is something that we brought up again today, probably very interesting for most of you. And then finally, for those of you who are doing non-STEM courses, we definitely have one coming up on that. There are some really great people who are doing innovative stuff with citizen science and English courses. So I highly recommend all of you listen to that, because you can also incorporate writing and lessons from these non-STEM courses in your STEM courses. So please attend that and make it worthwhile.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and I think we're going to go to just video. Okay, and so we're going to switch over to maybe dealing with some of the questions or reviewing some of the questions that are in the Google Doc. Bucky, have you gotten a chance to pick out 1 or 2 that you would like to start with?
Yeah, I went ahead earlier and...
I'm going to drop the link again, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bucky, I'm sorry.
Yeah, all right, so I went ahead and I started answering a few of the questions, and then I've been putting in some stuff as we went. So we can just migrate over and check it out.
Okay, wait, are you asking me to do a screen share?
No. All of us.
Oh, okay. You're just saying everybody get in the Google Doc. I was just making sure I understood.
What I want to do, I just want to, like us to just talk. We see faces. People ask us questions. We can see their faces. Okay. So you said one thing earlier that I wanted to get back to. And what was that? I should have been taking notes. You had me entranced.
If only my students were so amenable.
Nope, learning objectives, we're hitting that next time. Yep, okay, great. Oh, I think this is a really great one. Okay, so the question is, how can we build CitSci activities that are more than just take a photo and upload it to an app? That's one let's do. All right, so with this one, Colleen has a lot of good insight, because with iNaturalist, you take photos, you upload it, you try your best to identify, or you tell an expert, I need you to identify this for me. If none of you have used iNaturalist, it's a great tool, but there's a lot of open-endedness about it that takes just some getting used to, right? So as you go to look at these various apps and citizen science projects that want to identify biodiversity, most of those require pictures to be uploaded. And when people think about citizen science projects, that's what they think of. So let's start with that and then move on from that. So first of all, based on the response I gave in the document, the very fact that a student goes out and takes a picture of something and then uploads it, it's not just them taking a picture. All right. What that is them looking in their environment, saying, oh, there's a stupid bug on the wall, and getting up and taking a picture. And then they look at that picture and suddenly they're observing the bug that's on the wall. It's not just a bug anymore. It's something living in their environment. So long as you can then take that picture and make them look at it closer, then you're allowing that further learning to happen. I think the biggest thing that I want you to get out of today is that citizen science within these, actually citizen science in general in education, it's that tool. It's the thing that you can use to have them take a concept and then hang it on a hat, right? It's now a place that they can say, what? I remember that concept because I did the citizen science project where I looked at that bug, and then we talked about beetles. That's a coleopteran. Oh yeah, I remember that because of that project I did. And if your whole idea has to do, if your whole class learning objectives have them learn like insect phylogeny, okay, or taxonomy, you can use the project as the scaffolding to make them learn that. So taking the photograph can easily do everything you need it to do with the right framing. Then moving on from that, you have tons of other projects that don't ask for photographs. There's things like Squirrel Mapper, which my students love quite a bit, where they go out and they make observations about squirrels and tell where they found squirrels. And again, it's just to see the variety of squirrels that are out there. And it's a very great thing because squirrels are so common in North America, especially here in the East. They're just so common. So it allows them to look at this common thing in the world in a different way than they would have before. All right, I know you want to say something. Go.
Oh, so I see a great question in here from Sammy, and they are asking that some of these, or they state that some of these suggestions are great for small classrooms, but I have a class of 100 students every semester. Any suggestions for verifying accuracy and providing feedback with large courses? And so one thing I can speak to you on that front is the course that I teach in the spring is a conservation biology course, and I average between about 90 and 110 students every spring semester. And that's the course I actually use iNaturalist with students on campus. I try not to use the same project in different courses because I get a lot of repeat offenders in my courses. And so one of the things that I have done with verifying iNaturalist data with that large a group of students is the key is to scaffold the assignments so that you start small, such that the first time I have students engage in iNaturalist, for example, they make less than 5 observations, and I give them lots of feedback on those 5 observations. And I usually have undergraduate TAs, so I don't actually get graduate students as TAs, but I can have former students who assist me in the class, and they're not able to grade, but they can check for completion and they can check for accuracy. And so one of the main things that I have my undergraduate TAs do in that conservation biology course is they basically hang out in iNaturalist all semester, helping to support the students. And so that's one way. So I take, the cream of the crop from the year before, the kids who really get it, and I bring them back the next year to help me kind of teach that next crop of students how to engage in iNaturalist. And so that's one way that I've kind of figured out how to deal with, oh my gosh, I have 100 students and I'm setting them free in iNaturalist, and I really don't want the iNat users to be mad at me. And I don't want the iNat users to be mad at the students because they'll be interacting with everybody on iNaturalist. So that's one tip. Maybe if others have ideas, they can add them into the document. Bucky, you got thoughts?
Yeah, I do. So with my classes of 200 or more, one of the things I do is I kind of mimic in a Google form the data input sheets from the projects that I use in my class. And so in that way, students will first input to me. I can check the data and say, you know what, your stuff is really great. Your next assignment to finish off the points is to properly input this data into the database for the project, and they'll do that as well. Something else is to have each individual student, so I assign them into groups, usually groups of 4 or 5, and I have each person input data. And so they each take the measurements, and then they can see variation in measurement or counts or whatever the case may be. And then we can also see if one person is just not doing it whatsoever. Again, this is also done through Google Forms, and that's a great way for assessment because I can see who is submitting and what time they're submitting, if they were in class or not in class.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that we often do with Google Forms with the students is after they've made their, say, iNaturalist observations, they complete a Google form, and in there they kind of provide their username, and then we create, little formulas so that we can query their iNaturalist accounts without having to delve fully into iNaturalist as well. I see another question here, I think from Susan Macy at American Museum of Natural History, asking if there's a good repository of all the different types of citizen science projects that students could review that would have the ability to do a senior thesis type of independent project. And resource or guidance on how to do larger projects with these resources. So I think the answer to that is yes. I think maybe it's not specific to just being about citizen science, but to maybe being, it depends on what you want to do. If you want students to both contribute data as well as access data. So maybe looking for open projects. So projects where, you know, you're engaging and you can pull data right back out. I'm a community ecologist, so many of the examples or the things I tend to think about with citizen science tend to be in the ecology, natural history, evolution realm, and that's where I spent most of my time exploring different projects. But there's definitely ways to kind of do that. One resource I can think of off the top of my head is maybe looking at, if you're into, being that you're at Museum of Natural History, I'm thinking the Blue Group, which is biodiversity learning undergraduate education. Do you know what I'm talking about, Bucky, or no?
No, no,
Maybe
I don't.
maybe somebody can type that one in there. If not, I'll find that link and add it in later. Oops, I just lost my screen.
Colleen, there was a question in the chat directed at you.
Ooh.
Yeah. I will say it to you. Can you go into more detail or give examples of how you would use peer groups for the project? You mentioned them as a forum to provide verification, feedback, etc.
Yeah. So one of the ways I've done that is I've had students engage in research with the National Phenology Network. So this one is dependent upon you having students in the same, actually I can think of another example too, but the first one is, this is one where it's dependent on having students in the same place or access to the same place. So NPN monitors the timing of life cycle events in various species, plants and animals. At Brandeis on campus, we actually have a bunch of trees that are tagged for NPN. And one of the ways that I have peer verification and peer groups in projects is when students are out making phenology observations, they're assigned anywhere between 3 and 5 trees, depending on the semester. And there's multiple students assigned to those 3 or 5 trees, but it's not like they do it in a cohort. So it's not like there's 3 students who do the same 3 to 5 trees. What happens is when the data comes in, I have 3 replicates of observations on that single tree per week. And then students can we talk about it sometimes in class where we pull up the data and we see there's some variation. And then we talk about, well, maybe how is it that you're assessing percent canopy color change versus somebody else in the class? And so that's one way. So if you have them making observations about the same things, you can have them talking about those replications. Another way to give peer feedback is, if you do use something like iNaturalist, you can assign them into working groups where they're then helping one another look at each other's observations. And I don't necessarily encourage them to improve the iNaturalist. The way it works is you take a photo of something, you upload it, and you add a basic ID to it along with some other metadata by saying what you call it. And that what you call it should only be what you call it to the level that you're confident in calling it. And so for many students, when they first start out, calling something a plant is their level of confidence, and that's fine. And so what I might have students do is maybe in an online discussion forum, like an asynchronous online discussion forum, they'll share their iNaturalist observations with one another and then provide one another with tools outside of iNaturalist as to how to improve the identifications of those species. So you can have them working outside of the project, having these discussions and, doing the things we want them to do, like dichotomous keys, etc., such that it's complementing, right? That the iNaturalist work is kind of complementing that traditional kind of ecology, natural history skill we want them to acquire. Did that get to some of it, Bucky?
Oh yeah, that was fabulous. Okay, so there was another question about biology labs, so general biology labs. How can you incorporate this stuff into those biology labs? And I just wanted to make a note that this is something I'm very interested in. And this summer, I have actually gotten a hold of all the people who are in charge of labs at biology labs at NC State. And I am working with us to make our own online laboratory manual. A lot of these using citizen science projects, because I have projects I used to use in my lecture class that I didn't have time to do everything properly there. But if you put them in a lab setting, it'd be great. So I'm going to be transferring those into a lab manual. one of the things I would suggest if you wanted to do this is when you pick a project, of course, you want to start with your learning objectives, and we'll talk more about that next week. But if you wanted to do this, what I recommend is 1 week of learning the project, collecting the data, and then the next week of analyzing the data. And so it's going to be 2 weeks per project. You could even go further out if you want to. And the reason for that, and this actually extends back to the lecture course as well, whenever you do citizen science, I have found that students do not necessarily understand why they're doing it. You have to be very, very, very purposeful in saying, this is what you're going to do, this is why you're going to do it, this is how you're going to do it. And then they do it, and you come back and you say, this is what you did, this is why you did it, this is how you did it, this is why it all matters. So you wrap it up together. I find my students, I have to tell them 2 or 3 times everything to make them really absorb it. And so if they don't know why they're doing a project, they're not going to like it. And so within labs or lectures, spending more time doing the project, but specifying that it is for a specific concept, can help wrap it up all together. So whenever you consider this for labs, again, I recommend doing at least 2 weeks per lab, and then having a very specific point that you want them to get out of it and making it very clear.
Awesome. I see 2 other questions I can maybe take a stab at here quickly. One is from Alice in the UK. Hey, Alice. And it is, has anyone explored ways to link up different student cohorts at different universities through engagement in citizen science projects? The only case I know of that is I think it's called BioQuest, which is either New Zealand or an Australian-based group, and it's called I think it's called the BioQuest Challenge. And what they do is they set up a challenge and have teams register to engage, and those teams they have a university level one, and it's a biodiversity based one. The other thing I can think of is maybe something with stall catchers, which isn't necessarily university cohorts, but stall catchers also does, oh crud, I can't think of the name of their like sprints where they have these challenges online, but they also set up teams, and I think you can register different teams. And so the team ones where there's a competition is the only way I can think about off the top of my head of different cohorts of students. I think it'd be really fun to maybe compare and contrast, or have students monitoring one another in different platforms from different universities. So that could be an interesting approach for sure. Hopefully others might have insights in there. The other question that I see, which is right below that, I'm not sure who wrote it, but it says, has anyone had students work on a single project for an entire semester? And I can actually talk to that one a little bit as well. I teach a course that is just on citizen science, and in the course, students can be from a variety of disciplines. They can either be science students, education students, or what we call our advocates, which tend to be our environmental studies students. And in the course, in addition to having some communal citizen science experiences, each student is tasked with engaging in a citizen science project of their own choosing. And they work in that project that they've selected for the entire semester. And they usually keep a log that allows me to know what they've been doing, or we track their information on the SciStarter dashboard. And the outcomes of that can be varied depending on which student it was, if it was a science student or an ed student or an advocacy student. But I think Caroline Nickerson from SciStarter actually put some of the products of that course in the chat. And there was a student, Sylvia, who this past fall, who was really a shining star. And she has a couple of blog posts about some of her experiences engaging in citizen science. Maybe Caroline can bump that in the chat for us or put it underneath as an example. But you can definitely, that's a small course. I only have 18 students in it, so I can actually give them that kind of leeway and monitor and follow and see what they're doing. And then we often have touch points as they are engaging in the citizen science research, where they're sharing back to their peers in class. And they often also organize on campus citizen science events. So that's a hybrid course. So we are half online and half face-to-face. And so they have events on campus where they actually organize other students to engage in the project that they participated in. So they become organizers of the events as well.
Yeah, and just to get back to those two questions Colleen just mentioned, the last one, I don't have students do a single project. I link several projects together under an isolated umbrella of ecology on NC State's campus. So that's also something to explore. And I pick individual projects and link them together. So at the end, students do one complete project, which links the data they collected from all these projects into a poster presentation. I just submitted some grants actually to try and get this up into a website for people to be able to see some of the results there. And in terms of student cohorts working on stuff, here in North Carolina, we started this project a while ago where we have UNC, NC State, ECU students, and I'm still trying to get a few other universities here in North Carolina to do it, all under the Project Caterpillars count. And so we would all take data right around the same time and see how things are different. And the little bit of data that we have from this project has been really interesting because it turns out that the data that was collected outside universities is way, way richer in caterpillars compared to stuff on university campuses. And then we can even see differences in between university campuses. And that's getting a lot of my students wondering, what kind of stuff are you spraying on our bushes? Why don't we have butterflies here? And it's starting to raise concerns about, you could have butterflies or you can have leaves with no holes in them. And so which do we want more? So I think that more of these things, if you can get a cohort of people together, either across the nation, in your state, even in your town, to start doing this stuff, I think it would be awesome. So more of us need to get out there and make connections and try and get projects to be coordinated.
Awesome. Bucky, I see another question and I think I might be able to squeeze in before the hour finishes up. And this one's from Jeanette Dumas. She has a question: has anybody had students read the primary lit where data from the project they were involved in is presented? And I'm going to give that a 2 thumbs up in that I've had students do that. I'm actually pretty much a one-trick pony. And by one-trick pony, I mean every course that I teach engages students or includes citizen science in it in some way, shape, or form. So the NPN project that I was talking about, there's a ton of publications out of the National Phenology Network. And in the ecology course where we do NPN, I often, instead of referring simply to the textbook, will have the students read from the primary lit, and it'll either be from publications using NPN data or other citizen science phenology research. There's also a ton of publications using iNaturalist data. And so in conservation biology, one of the final projects that the students do after they've finished all of their iNaturalist work is they actually have to do a lit review and identify one publication that uses iNaturalist research in a way that they didn't anticipate. So I share with them in the beginning when we introduce iNaturalist some of that. And there's a huge literature using citizen science data, and many projects will also host those publications on the project web pages. And so that's another place to kind of start to look for it. And then even linking back to the SITSI course that I teach, I had one student, I'm pretty confident it was stall catchers that she had engaged in. And about 3 months after the class ended, she emailed me because Stall Catchers was publishing data and she was going to be listed as an author for having done the Stall Catchers project. I'm pretty confident it was Stall Catchers. If it wasn't Stall Catchers, it was another one of the cell-based ones where you're watching things change.
Wow. That's really cool.
So it's really cool. So there's lots of opportunities. And I'll also say I've had students, because of their SITSI work, be interviewed by the New York Times. I had a student featured in the New York Times for his iNaturalist work. So you can really see where it will take them, because they can keep going with it beyond your classroom. So if they find something they're passionate about, and that to me is what the real hook is for why engaging them in citizen science, is because I want them to see they can have these science contributions after they leave my courses. And that's one of the biggest, I'd say, benefits that maybe we didn't mention in our presentation, but biggest benefits to having students engage. I see Rihanna's back, so I'm guessing she's going to rein us in.
It's 4 o'clock, and so I just wanted to say that our hour is up. I'm happy to stick around for a little while longer if anyone else is interested. But next week, same time, 3 p.m., and talking about, with Carolyn Nickerson, talking about how to choose a project. So thank you all for showing up. I'm really, really happy with the number of people who showed up today. So thank you all.
Yeah, and thank you to Colleen and Bucky. This was fantastic and a great resource for everyone on the call. We did record it, and we'll be sharing this recording, and we'll be sharing a link to the notes. And so if you have further questions and you want to kind of keep crowdsourcing, that will be kind of a living document. You can keep posting some stuff there, and hopefully we can keep the conversation going. Thanks, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you again on one of our future happy hours.
Thanks. I can hang out for a few minutes too, so.
Great. I'm going to stop the recording, but we can keep chatting.